So this talk will focus on Zaha Hadid very much as a practitioner as well as a theoretician. But as I mentioned in the last talk, at the beginning of her career, she's really not building. She's not making buildings. She's developing ideas. They're applied to buildings, but the ideas are really powerful, even kind of apart from finding fruition in a building. So this is Zaha Hadid on the right, maybe in her 40s or so, and on the left, a more recent photograph. She actually died at the age of 65 in 2016. So she, as I mentioned in the other talk, was a real groundbreaker in terms of being a woman in architecture. And she said this about her role there. She said, "I used to not like being called a woman architect. I'm an architect, not just a woman architect. But I see the incredible amount of need from other women for reassurance that it could be done. So now I don't mind it at all." And she really did transition to become, I think, an incredible role model for what women can do in architecture in the 21st century. And in particular, she had a hard path she was trying to go, no matter what her gender or her cultural background might have been. That was a rough path, but she did it, and also did it as a woman and as an Arab and as a Muslim. Incredible accomplishment. So as I mentioned, she founds her office in 1979. And at that point, she's primarily doing competition entries. So this is one she entered in 1983. It was for the Peak Leisure Club. This would have been sort of like a country club in Hong Kong. It was on a very spectacular site overlooking the city. It was entered by many architects all over the world. And for this competition, she did these beautiful paintings. And that's pretty much the whole entry to the competition, was these extraordinary paintings that only Zaha Hadid was doing at the moment. And it was actually not particularly easy to figure out what the building particularly would be like. There were some more descriptive drawings that showed moments in the building. I love the one on the right where it's really about these divers and the incredible grace and line and visual quality of their bodies in the dive. And really that's what the building's about, this graceful line and character and quality that's in the buildings. I want to read another quotation here that I think is germane to the work she's doing in 1983. She says, "There's no figurative art in Arabic tradition. It's all decorative patterns that come from geometric design. So of course, these things influence you." So Zaha Hadid is definitely looking at something that will be particular to her, that will be an expression of her direction as an artist. The first building she actually does do and completed in 1983 was the Vitra fire station. And this building was kind of a fire station, kind of not a fire station. Vitra, of course, is a very famous furniture producing company in Switzerland. And so this was at their factory. And at the moment, they did not have a fire department. So they had to kind of have their own fire truck and little fire crew. And they needed a place for them to be. But the owner of Vitra was a great patron of the arts and a patron of architecture. And so he didn't want to just build a little fire station. So he gets Zaha Hadid to do this building that, by the way, did accommodate a fire truck. But was really a kind of essay in concrete and in glass. So this is the fire station right there that Zaha Hadid did. And you can see this just in an industrial park where they make furniture in the corner of Switzerland here, right? Almost in Germany, almost in France. And the building was a piece of sculpture. Honestly, they commissioned a piece of art. A bit before this, the owner of Vitra had commissioned Frank Gehry, who at the time was not a well-known architect, an up-and-coming architect. And they had him design an exhibition space where they could display their furniture. And that's kind of over on the campus over here, off the picture. Later on, they would commission Herzog and de Meuron to do that building right there. So they were doing these things where then they usually chose young architects before they kind of had their career made. And they certainly were taking a chance on Zaha Hadid, who'd been in practice for, by the time this was finished, but for 14 years, but had never really had a completed building. Another quotation from her, she says, there are 359 other degrees. Why limit yourself to one? So 90 degrees was not her favorite, but in this case, she didn't use any 90-degree angles. And it really is about space. And the truth is, it was not used as a fire station, but for a short period of time. The city that they were nearby got a fire department and got the capacity to fight fires on their campus. And so it wasn't needed as a fire station anymore. And it really was just these beautiful dynamic spaces, and eventually was turned into a kind of exhibition space with a little cafe and a bookstore and some other kinds of functions like that, almost like a little visitor center for that campus. But it began to establish this vocabulary of concrete and glass, very powerful angular geometry, bold, dynamic spaces, all of which you could see in those paintings, but this was the first time it came to life as a piece of architecture. So that was Zaha Hadid's first building. By that time, she's already extremely well known, and everybody sort of anxiously awaited this first big move. Shortly after that, 10 years after that, she won another competition. That one for the Peak in Hong Kong. She won the competition, but the building never got built. The client actually went bankrupt, and so no building was ever built there. And she had several others. She did an opera house in Cardiff in Wales. She won the competition, but again, the building never got built. So this was a third competition she won for the Rosenthal Center for Contemporary Arts in Cincinnati. But in this case, the building did get built. Since it's right in downtown Cincinnati, probably not the kind of site that you would think, whoa, this is a perfect site for Zaha Hadid. There's a woman who kind of liked to expand, and maybe the Peak was an ideal site. Even the Vitra fire station had some room around it. But this was a very contained site, an urban site in the middle of downtown Cincinnati. It's in a kind of arts district. There's a performing arts center by Caesar Pelli that's right across the street. But again, it's using that concrete and these bold black forms, which were also there in the Vitra fire station, then huge voids of glass in various places, and this very strong sculptural and dynamic sculptural attitude where it pushes and pulls, and it's muscular and it moves around. Even though it was more rectilinear, it still had a great deal of dynamism to it. This very interesting hung acoustical tile ceiling where it's hung through most of the space, and it becomes a kind of major feature that defines space inside the building, but now just this sliver thin kind of plane. When you go in, there is this concrete floor that turns up into a wall. She called that an urban carpet that just moved into the building. And that began between the hung ceiling here and the big concrete wall, the incredible delicacy of that and the massive strength of that. Between that was this kind of atrium space that had this huge sculptural black stair that rose up through that. And you got to the second floor on that stair. Then you shift a little bit, and that black stair continues on up through the whole building. Fully half the building is this movement space, this sculptural space that takes you dynamically up through the building. And then because it is a small site, there isn't a lot of room left over for exhibition spaces. So the galleries are not very large. And in fact, I would say fully half of the space that's not circulation is the cafe and the bookstore and those kinds of necessary art museum functions these days. So not a lot of gallery space, but an incredible, in Zaha Hadid's mind, a piece of art that they purchased. This is, the Contemporary Art Museum gets a huge contemporary piece of art. And that's very much what the building is about. It's about being that piece of art. And that really was one of the first of these museums that maybe the art museum doesn't have much of a collection, but their calling card gets to be a building that becomes a kind of piece of art that is the reason for going to the Contemporary Art Museum. And it is a spectacular experience. Another early building, and still these are not coming very quickly, but slowly she's getting a body of work here. This is the Fino Science Center. This one was not won in a competition. This one had the museum interviewed architects and selected Zaha Hadid to design it. I had a very interesting experience at this building. So I was standing taking these photographs out here, and I'd been at the museum probably for a couple of hours looking around, and obviously was interested in the building. And this guy comes out of the museum, he's about my age, and he approaches me and says, "I notice you've been looking around the building here. What's your interest in it?" I don't think he thought I was doing any harm, but he just was curious. And so I said, "Well, I'm an architect from the United States. I'm interested in Zaha Hadid's work. I'm just trying to understand the building." And he said, "Well, I'd be glad to give you a little tour if you'd like." And so he took me inside and gave me a soup to nuts tour of the offices and the back of house and the everything in the entire museum. Turns out the guy was the director of the museum, and he was up there on a Sunday afternoon and had a moment and was just interested in talking about his building. And he gave me a lot of insight into the process of making the building. So he said they selected Zaha Hadid because they went to the Vitra fire station, and he looked at that space and he saw how dynamic it was, how much it was about movement. And he could imagine all the kids going to a science museum and moving and thrusting and surging, and that building just captured the kind of movement of kids in a science museum. So he thought, she's perfect. That's just what we need. And he said, "I've never been disappointed a minute in the kind of dynamism and movement in the building. It was there from day one, and it's super appropriate for an art museum." But he said, she was very difficult to work with because she's not particularly interested in my needs in this building. So he gave the example of there was a space in the building that was for changing exhibits, so that he didn't know what would be in there in the future. Science is a dynamic field, and who knows what kind of exhibit's going to come that they want to employ there. So many of the other parts of the building could be very particular, and that's fine. They had a permanent exhibit that they could work around that architectural particularity. But in this area, he wanted a little more general building, a little more flexible space. But she had in that area a floor that went up and down and ramped and moved. And so if he had a big exhibition that expected a flat floor, he didn't have a flat floor to give it. So he kept mentioning that and saying, I really need a flat floor in the exhibition space, in that temporary exhibition space. And the drawings would come back and they still had the ramps and the steps and all of that. And so finally it was the 11th hour, they were about to finish the drawings, and he said, "Zaha, help me out here. I have to have a flexible space for my changing exhibits. I need your help. Just help me out. And Zaha Hadid said, help you? Help you? What do you think I am, a nurse? I'm not a nurse, I'm an artist. And to this day, the ramped floor and steps are in his temporary exhibit space, and it greatly restricts what he can do in that space. But she was about making a piece of art. And if it didn't accommodate the needs of that client, well, she's not a nurse, she's an artist. So that's very much the ethic of the whole building. It is a great piece of sculpture. It's on a very critical site in the city, and very focal kind of place. And it's all lifted up on these, what Le Corbusier might have called pilotis, but now they're rooms. There are these 7 oddly shaped rooms that lift up the bulk of the museum. So it occupies that kind of triangular space. A great deal of the city of Wolfsburg is over here. And this is a major connector that goes over, it's a pedestrian bridge, and it goes over the train track and over the river. And on the other side is the whole Volkswagen production plant. So major employer in the city. And then the sort of downtown is over here. So people had been accustomed to walking across this site to get between the Volkswagen plant and downtown. So she did not deter that movement. She allows that to go under the building, and the whole building is picked up so that you can cross that bridge, and then you can go right straight through the building to the downtown instead of having to go around the building. And there you can see that space under. Each of those comes down, and one is a cafe, one might be a little conference area, and a couple of them are then the actual entry that takes you up into the building above, which is the museum. And that space, that undercroft space, is very kind of mysterious, and it's dark, and it's very, very atmospheric down in the bottom down there, very dramatically lit. And then you come up through those, two of those legs take you up into the building via escalators, as you can see there. And these movement spaces coming from the lower part to the upper part are extraordinarily dynamic and sculptural and bizarre as you move up into this fantasy world of the Science Museum up above. And it's all very kind of technical feeling, and with this grid on the ceiling, which things are hanging from it. As I mentioned, very, very articulated all over the whole building. It's not a big neutral museum floor. It's got lots of little corners and eddies and ramps and mountains and valleys, and all of that is sculpted. As you can see here, this is an anteroom for the auditorium, and the floor just goes up into the wall, and that becomes a little bench, and that kind of articulation is all over the building. This is a place where it makes a little mountain, and you go over a little tunnel, and it's really cool and a dynamic space for the kids to wander around in. But of course, pretty impossible to do exhibitions or have any flexibility to change your exhibitions inside. But by the way, I have to say, totally crazy, cool exhibitions that were in there too, in part maybe provoked by the kind of stimulus of the architecture there. Okay, so now, seriously, Zaha Hadid is on her way. The Fino was a very, very important building. It was quite a large building and made a big, big splash. Everyone saw that building, and it really did express. Maybe different from the Cincinnati Museum, which was so constrained. This was one where she could kind of feel her muscles and express it in a pretty, a way that's very true to her sense of where she was going. Shortly after that, she won a competition again. And the cool thing is she's Rem Koolhaas is one of the competitors in most of these competitions, so she's beating her old teacher and boss in these competitions, and she's very, very successful in the competitions. This one, I saw all 5 of the entries in that competition, and I will say that she had by far the best site utilization. It was a really weird site where there's an existing building right there, and then the site has a little jog corner that goes out here, another funny long jog corner that goes out there. It's between 2 streets, and the other competitors seem to want to plop a kind of holistic building down somewhere here, and it left little shards of incompletion over on the corners and just didn't do very good site utilization. But Zaha Hadid came in and actually just made magic out of that crazy shape of the site, letting these fingers go into those skinny little spaces and still be unified with making a kind of holistic building there. And she takes the 2 streets on either side and connects an open space between them, a little park, and that park becomes the entry. Other people were trying to get the entry on that skinny little space or back over here, and then how the museum worked was difficult. Much easier to enter in the center and then be able to get access to all the galleries from there. So in terms of site, it was a beautifully, beautifully sited building. It's in a fairly nondescript part of Rome, and the buildings around are not spectacular by any means. And in particular, this building at the front that was to be maintained, a very ordinary building. So she just comes crashing down on top of it and indicates, okay, something different is about to happen for the rest of the museum here. And it is the vocabulary she's now begun to master pretty well. Big, bold, concrete forms, voids of glass that open up between that. Way back at the Vitra fire station, she was using these clusters of steel columns. It's a bizarre way to do structure. That's not the way buildings kind of want to be held up, but they can be held up that way if you put enough reinforcing in that concrete and make it span between those. So she's doing dramatically different kinds of things that maybe are not practical or sensible in a structural sense, but can be done, and she's got the daring to do it. Dramatic cantilevers of this one tongue that comes up and then gives an incredible view out to the nicer part of Rome that you can see in the distance there at the top of the building. So she's hollowed out this little triangular park connecting the 2 streets. The entry is just off of that park, and it makes quite a nice little community space around there. These dramatic clusters of columns become a major kind of architectural feature on the park side, and then allow the building to just hover up above there and seem like it has no weight at all. And then that dramatic gesture of the big cantilever kind of making a landmark in this big public space of the triangular park. Then on the back side of the building, she takes all the nasty stuff and puts it over there. So all the fire stairs and egress are back over there. Her signature black stair is all along the back and tucked away in these very, very blank concrete walls on the back side of the building. So then you enter several different places off of that triangular park, but they all take you into the same big lobby space. And it's a spectacular kind of space. Again, as Zaha Hadid now is being known for, it's very sculptural, very dynamic, full of movement and smooth, sinuous lines that take you into the various areas of the gallery. So you enter at the center here, and then these paths that are lit on the bottom, so they have a strong light that is sending you in different directions out to different parts of the museum from that central core. And she would have designed everything in it. She designs the furniture here, incredible reception desk right there. All of it cut of the same cloth and having that same feeling as the architecture. And those signature black stairs being these sculptural elements that dance through that big dynamic open space. And then she has a kind of system of lighting that she uses in the galleries and in the lobby. In the galleries, it's much more protected so that it doesn't get UV light into the galleries. But in the lobby, it's much more open, introducing lots of generous natural light into the building there. And there you can see in one of the galleries where it's more protected. So the same system is in the lobby, but filtered and controlled in different ways when she gets to the galleries. And most of the galleries are just like this. They're those long tubes of sort of uniform width, very sinuous and dynamic as you move through them, extremely flexible in that you can cordon them off however you want, but just big loft spaces where the art is displayed. And really the architectural moment is in that lobby. There's a little cafe in the lobby, and she would have done all the counter and the pieces that kind of emphasize the character of the building, now taken down to another scale. One thing that's great in all this period where she wasn't doing so many buildings, she was designing a lot of other things. She's designed shoes, she's designed jewelry, she's a designer, she's an artist, and she can design anything. She also is an extremely stylish person herself. She has a way of dressing and a way of grooming that expresses really somewhat the same ethos as the design things that she does. So there's always a kind of impeccable flair that you see in how she presents herself and her work. So that's M.I.T, the Museum of the 21st Century in Rome, and this one would have been, a major landmark in her career. This is winning a big competition, taking the building to fruition, a very successful building. The next building I want us to look at is the one she did for the 2008 Olympics in London. You know, she's Iraqi, but she became a British citizen. So her practice is based in London, and but she's done almost no buildings in London or in England. And that's kind of was a sore point with her, that she did not get very many commissions in her adopted country. But when they had the Olympics in London in 2008, she was given the commission for the swim center. And this was quite a different kind of building for her to some extent. I mean, it's got all of her signature moves, and it certainly is obviously Zaha Hadid. But because it had to have a big open space in the center, it sits on only 3 points, 1, 2, 3 points. And it was all about making this very dramatic roof sculpture that would float above those 3 points and be this beautiful, sinuous sculptural form. Now, unfortunately for the Olympics, they had to have a lot more seating in it than they would ever need subsequently. So these wings were put on to put bleachers that would allow you to see in the sides there and get a much larger audience. But then the bleachers were all taken away after the Olympics. That part of the building, those 2 wings were removed, and that simple form of the roof was left. So that's where the bleachers were. They would have just continued this on up, but they were then subsequently removed, and by 2011, we get the final building here. So this one is bright, open, airy, sculptural. You have the diving area, which gets a little higher ceiling, so the shape of this floats up and down, higher in the diving area, lower in the swimming area. The concourses around the outside with beautiful views of the Olympic grounds. And it has that kind of grace of diving. And I think of that drawing that she had for the peak competition of the divers, and she saw the beauty in the body making a dive, and the form of the building has that kind of sinuous, graceful beauty in it, and it's a gorgeous piece of sculpture. And there you can see it without the wings, with the wings taken away after 2011. I would say that this is an artist who definitely has her signature style. And she has a vocabulary that she works in very consistently. But she's also maturing that vocabulary and refining it. And just as Mondrian would have slowly altered the proportions or the geometries he was working with while still staying very much in his genre. So Zaha Hadid is evolving some of her vocabularies. Maybe some of the curvilinear sculptural concrete pieces that we saw at Fino now begin to take even stronger shape in the Olympic Stadium, the swim center. And then in the Gwangju Opera House, that takes it a step further. And in this case, we have a very, very large performing arts center in Gwangju, a huge city in China. And this is out from the center of Gwangju in almost a new city that was being built as a second downtown of Gwangju. And there's a cultural district that they're making with a new art museum and a new library and a new performing arts center, and many high-rise buildings in that area. So this is the kind of new center of Gwangju. And probably the 100% centerpiece of it was to be this performing arts center, the Opera House. And again, she wins it in a competition. And it is really made out of two pieces, a dark black granite piece that is the primary opera house, and then a lighter granite piece that is a separate theater over here. So it's these two, she referred to them as stones, two stones that were sitting next to each other. There you can see the primary opera house and the secondary theater space there. They don't actually connect on the ground level. You actually enter from the city at a lower undercroft, and you go under a plaza. Then you enter up onto that plaza and see these two big forms interacting with each other on that plaza level and having a kind of dialogue. And then, of course, functionally down below, they are connected for service there. And that's how you enter at that lower level. And there are some restaurants and activities that are at that lower level, sort of reminiscent in some ways of Fino, where we see these elements that are occupied but seem to be holding up the level up above. And then you emerge up these dynamic ramps and get to the upper level where you're seeing then the two buildings interacting with each other. The Opera House in the black granite and the other performance space in the lighter granite there. And then big open connector spaces that are for surging crowds that are coming and going to performances. And then from the other side, there's a more garden-like portion where there's a water feature and steps that are sculpting the land again as it interfaces with those big built volumes. These stones are, they're very, very sculptural. They're made, and this is Zaha Hadid, shaping these forms just exactly like she wants them to be. At a certain point, there's a decision about how to face these buildings. She may initially have thought of them in concrete. That's what she'd been building in primarily. But at some point, the decision is made to make them in granite, and to make them in granite that has triangular pieces of granite in it. And granite, of course, is a very hard, stiff material. And so these little triangular flat pieces were meant to be able to be flexible enough to move around and make these very complex shapes with double curvature in many locations. And honestly, that really did not work. So you can see many places where that triangular geometry really fails as it tries to make the sculpted shapes that were in the building. And you get many, many, many glitches where it just clearly is a kind of mistake. I put that slide in here as well because this is on the inside. There also are moments where they have indirect light. So the light lamp is meant to be hidden and it's bouncing the light off of the adjacent form. But in fact, the camera doesn't show it, but you can see up and see the lamp, which you're not supposed to be able to see. It's just, a utilitarian little tube of light meant to be mysterious and hidden, but in fact, in execution did not actually work. And there are many, many points in the building where it's embarrassingly poorly made. Now, I was in Guangzhou and, associated with some architects there, and they were taking me around to see buildings in the city. And, of course, top of my list was the Guangzhou Opera House. And I'd seen the photographs on the cover of Architectural Record, a night shot of the building. Looked spectacular. It had won the Building of the Year for Architectural Record in Asia. I'd gotten a whole lot of publicity. And these architects they didn't want to take me to the Opera House. They said, no, let us show you the library. Oh, no, let us show you the art museum. And we went to the library and the art museum, and they're beautiful buildings, and they're beautifully crafted. And finally I said, dude, you got to take me to the Opera House. I'm going to find that Opera House. If you don't take me, I'm going to find it on my own, but I'm going to see that Opera House. So they took me there, and they were very embarrassed. They were embarrassed by the failures of the building technically. And it's not something to lie about. It's something to be frank about. Now, I don't know the explanation here because many of Zaha Hadid's buildings are beautifully crafted. And I don't think you can say, oh, it was China, they just don't know what they're doing in China. No, that museum and that library were beautifully, beautifully made. But there was a decision here to make a building form with this double curvature and tight radiuses, and then another decision made to face it in granite and in this triangulated format. And in the end, those were just incompatible. And maybe this is a signal of the kind of brash, strong, willful design direction that is risky. And sometimes the risk does not pay off. And there are failures, as I think in Guangzhou, there are failures in that building. So there is the macro sculptural form, which is very strong and very appealing. But when you get down to the finer level of detail, it's a building that has significant problems. And very much the same thing can be said on the inside. It is spectacular spatially on the inside, as Maxi was, or many of her projects. Very dynamic stair. Again, she loves using the stair as a device for soaring you through the space. And it's now a black stair with white walls on it that become that big sculptural device that contrasts in a way with the triangular quality of the structure of that outside envelope. But all the way through both of these lobby spaces, it's a very active, lively, dynamic space. But there also are glitchy little corners where things don't really, come together. I think this is a piece of ductwork that looks like it was not considered at the beginning and kind of put in later and a bit circumstantial. And that happens over and over there. The triangular geometry is strangely compromised many, many places. It's ambitious. It's an incredibly ambitious building, but probably does not live up to that ambition, in my humble opinion. So here is the lobby space out there that we were just talking about. That's the performance hall there. the fly loft and all the backstage space over here. Technically, it's a superb opera house. Chinese opera is a huge thing there. And the actual opera hall is stunning. It is as sculptural as the exterior is, now in wood and beautifully, beautifully fabricated wood. It's dazzling with these like star-like light fixtures on the top. Many of the lobby spaces also very beautiful in this GFRC glass fiber reinforced concrete in these sculptural shapes. And that area very different from the major lobby space, which is this muscular, geometric, triangulated space contrasted with that big stair. So sometimes when you're ambitious, the results that maybe are not what you anticipated. But that Guangzhou Opera House, again, got a lot of notice and a lot of identity for Zaha Hadid. A building that was completed shortly after Guangzhou is the Broad Art Museum. This one is on the campus of Michigan State University. Again, this one's going a little bit back to Vitra and some of the geometries that were there. This is the Michigan State campus that we're seeing right there, the kind of normal campus vocabulary building around there. There's a major entry point to the campus, and the building opens up and receives you at that point, and is a tremendous landmark on the campus. And perhaps appropriately for an art museum, it says, I'm different, I'm not a normal academic building. I am for a very different purpose, and I'm a piece of art and a piece of sculpture for the art museum. And again, this is an art museum that I would not say they have a spectacular collection inside. Their probably most prominent piece of art is their building. And she, I think, lives up to that requirement. It's made out of these folded plates of stainless steel that are at various different angles and create a really jagged, kind of aggressive geometry there. Sometimes they open up with glass in between, but for the most part, they're just faceted panels of stainless steel. Very powerful image from the outside. It's in a very beautiful environment. There are big, mature trees around, and it really is set off beautifully by the landscape around it. And then inside, again, signature kind of Zaha Hadid, very dynamic spaces, not very many right angles, many tilted walls and ceilings, and that dynamic stair that goes up through the whole thing, the black stair. And again, in an environment that all of the walls and the planes and the ceilings all are at radically different angles. The galleries themselves are definitely not conventional galleries. Each gallery has a shape that is eccentric. And in many cases, I think the idea was that they would commission pieces that would fit the building rather than we have a collection that the building is supposed to accommodate. So there are moments when they're accommodating existing pieces of artwork, but often they're actually commissioned pieces. This is a very, very eccentric gallery space, long, thin, angular room. And they commissioned a piece which is actually made out of dental material. So if you have dentures made, there's a pink material that's meant to look like gums. Well, that's what this art piece is made out of. And then they painted the walls the same color as the gums. And there's a really amazing dialogue between the commissioned piece of art and the room. And the room helped generate the piece of art, and the piece of art makes the room all the more beautiful and dynamic there. So throughout the building, incredibly dynamic spaces on the inside as well. So that would go up to 2012. The office is now extremely busy. They have many, many commissions It's going to be quite a large office. And the last building we're going to look at is done, actually I think completed about the time she died, 520 West 28th Street. This is in New York, and it's on the High Line. So this is the High Line going right there, extremely visible from the High Line. It's near Hudson Yards, which we're seeing right there, huge new development in New York City. This is a very, very high dollar address and a very sculptural set of condominiums. I watched the building under construction, and up until the skin went on, it just looked like an ordinary building. You can see the frame inside, where it's pretty ordinary rectilinear frame stacked up, but then on the outside a skin that has that kind of character that Zaha Hadid has now refined to a fine art. And every time with a slightly different nuance here, using actually the half circle and a full circle in an interesting way in relation to her more dynamic and irregular curvilinear geometry. But extremely beautiful materials, stainless steel, curved glass. This one is executed magnificently. The craft is extraordinary in this building, both the concrete and the steel and the curved glass in it. So this is an incredible body of work, and I'm so impressed at someone who starts where Zaha Hadid started and has the tenacity and the boldness and the conviction and the strength of will to bring that to fruition. And this is a very powerful theory. It's a very powerful set of ideas about what architecture ought to be and what architects ought to be and what the role of an architect should be. And she believed it with extraordinary conviction, paid her dues for that 14 years of working out a way of designing that had that kind of conviction and assurance in it. And then through these competitions, demonstrating the maturity of her thinking and what she did, and then proving herself in some key places like Fino Art Center, and building into what is now a huge office with commissions all over the world, and a very, very strong sense of what the ideas are in that work and what the work is to be for the future. Okay, that's it for today.